Silent Hill 3 is the third game in the Silent Hill franchise, and the second to last one developed by the original Team Silent studio. This one has always been the most interesting out of the original four for me, because it seems like it's always been the weird middle child between the original classic Silent Hill 1 and the critically acclaimed and fan-beloved Silent Hill 2. It's a game that doesn't seem like it has much to add to the formula of Silent Hill, whereas 2 took itself in a completely new direction, and the first one obviously being the beginning of the franchise. In a way, it almost seems like Team Silent went back to their roots with this entry, as this is a direct sequel to the first game. It doesn't have as much complexity in the characters or the emotionally depressing tone of Silent Hill 2, but instead offers some of the scary sequences in the franchise. Silent Hill 3 is a direct sequel to Silent Hill 1. This time we are taking control of Harry Mason's daughter, Heather, which is the baby at the end of the game that was given to Harry by Alessa. She's probably my favorite character to play as in the series. She has a lot of down-to-earth qualities about her that make her the perfect choice for a horror game protagonist. She doesn't put up with a lot of stuff, basically talking back at nearly any person that she comes across, which gives her a distinct personality that's really refreshing to play after playing as Harry and James for so long.
I am holy. So what?
She has a sense of humor to herself that is unlike previous protagonists too, like when she interacts with Brad and just says, "It's Brad." Or when you try to find something in one of the toilets, but she backs out and makes fun of you for even trying to do something like that.
Ugh, forget it. This is way too gross. Who would even think of doing something so disgusting?
But she's not just there to give sassy commentary either. She's written as a very strong character while still being emotionally deep. I think a lot of her likability comes from her voice actress, who does a great job at elevating her. She also has a lot of unique personality traits that you can pick up through interactions with different objects in the game. For example, if you interact with a mirror, she describes how she doesn't like mirrors, possibly hinting at a layer of insecurity that she has. Again, like a typical teenager would feel. These smaller interactions make her feel way more real than Harry or James. At the start of the game, Heather wakes up in a diner in the mall after having a nightmare. She leaves and encounters Douglas, a private detective hired to find her and bring her back to someone. She leaves him behind and tries to escape, but ends up encountering a closer, a disgusting looking creature that she then kills. From there, it's off to the races. The story this time around is presented in a very straightforward way. There's very little subtext to what's actually going on here, but that's quite okay. The story was interesting enough in this game that it got me hooked, and I was looking forward to seeing what would happen next in Heather's story. It may not be on the levels of Silent Hill 2, but the story does its job and is entertaining enough to keep me engaged throughout the experience. While the story may be a bit lacking compared to the previous entry, there is, however, plenty of striking imagery and symbolism to keep the fans of that entry satisfied with this one. In traditional Silent Hill enemy design, many of the monsters in this game represent the inner demons of a character in the story. This time it's Heather, and the enemies here all relate to her transition from childhood to womanhood, as that is one of the main themes of the story. For example, there's the Closer, which is a large, menacing-looking creature that has a lot of feminine features, or the Split Worm Boss, which kind of resembles some sort of phallic object. Not only do the enemies have this symbolism, but the locations do as well. A few of the areas in the game have these red-soaked and bloody-looking walls with long hallways. It's a really clever way of incorporating level design and art direction into the overall themes of the story. It's not like we have no interesting characters here, however. For the main villain we have Claudia, who is trying to restore Heather to her original version in Alessa, as well as fulfill Dolly's mission from the first game. There's also Douglas, as established before, is a private detective, who later reveals to Heather that he had a son that died attempting to rob a bank. It's the reason why he feels so protective of Heather and feels like he needs to be there with her throughout the story. And then there's Vincent, an incredibly creepy man who's devoted to the same religion as Claudia. He comes across as super untrustworthy, and yet he always puts Heather in a position where there's no choice but to trust him. Like in previous Silent Hill games, the cast of characters here is very small, which gives each of them much more room to breathe. While I think that Heather, Claudia, and Vincent are interesting characters, I don't really think they hold a candle to anyone from Silent Hill 2. I like that you can discover more of the character's backstory here this time, however, as opposed to Silent Hill 2. Claudia and Vincent's backstory is pretty interesting, especially if you're a fan of the occult and all the psychology that goes into that. However, I think Douglas is sorely lacking compared to the other characters. Now, I don't think he's a terrible character, but I think his backstory is just kind of thrown at you without much reason for being there other than to just give him some sort of depth at the last minute. His voice performance is also just really awkward and makes him not really super likable or even trustworthy.
You're You're in on this with that Claudia, aren't you?
Claudia? What about her? She asked me to find you, that's all.
So you are one of them.
Not to mention the fact that he just walks up to a teenage girl and starts following her around in the mall. Despite not having incredibly deep backstories and themes compared to Silent Hill 2, the side characters here are still interesting to watch and have enough substance to keep them from being boring.
I guess he hid the truth to keep you on his side. Hey.
This game is much more linear than previous entries. In both previous entries, you were able to walk around the town of Silent Hill and explore various alleys, homes, and other locations to get more resources. Granted, it wasn't super in-depth, but those games had that sort of hub world that Silent Hill 3 does not have. In fact, you don't even end up in Silent Hill until the second half of the game. To compensate for that, the level design is much more complex than the previous games. You have lots of rooms to explore in these areas, and many of them have multiple floors. The first area in the game is a huge mall with 2 floors, though many of those rooms are unable to be opened. But because of the vastness of these locations, it's very easy to get lost and confused at where you're supposed to go. I've missed a door or a key here and there because not only are there a lot of rooms, but they are also very detailed. Regardless of the complex level design, the typical Silent Hill formula is still here, returning for a third time. You find a room with a unique property to it, try and find a key item to bypass that, and fight monsters in between, all ending with a boss fight. The formula here still works though, and is still just as interesting to play through as the previous 2 games. This game also features some of the scariest sequences in the franchise, like when the bathroom door is knocking, the amusement park sequence, or the mirror room. I also think that Silent Hill 3 is one of the best looking games on the PS2. I played it on PC because, have you seen those prices? But the textures and the facial animations are still very high quality. The art style is also so great, and everything in the game feels just so grimy and dingy, even before the nightmare worlds. The lighting is also what helps it stand out. I particularly like the hallways in the apartment complex or the subway system. And the music here is fantastic as usual, and this time it offers a much more rock-focused score compared to the droning ambience of the first game or the second game. It fits with Heather's personality a lot more too, as she is a teenage girl with a lot of angst. Some of my favorite tracks in the franchise appear in this game. Not only are the regular tracks good, but the combat and counter songs are also completely nuts this time. It feels even more deranged than Silent Hill 1, although I do find that they get a little bit annoying after a while. Silent Hill 3 is much shorter than 1 or 2. Now, it only took me 3.5 hours to finish, but I think there's a lot of replay value here, with the higher difficulties and the multiple endings you can get. There are 3 different endings in Silent Hill 3. You have the normal good ending, which is always the ending that you'll get when you finish the game for the first time. On New Game Plus, you can achieve various goals in order to get a possessed ending. These goals include getting a certain amount of kills and taking a certain amount of damage. Now there's also the UFO ending as usual, which is achieved through similar means. I think the shorter length is actually pretty nice. Horror games in general need to have shorter lengths because after a certain amount of time has passed in the game, the scares start to dwindle, and you want to avoid that as much as possible, and Silent Hill 3 definitely does that. Plus, it makes a great game to speedrun. Silent Hill 3 is one of the best games in the series for sure. While it doesn't innovate so much in the gameplay or the story department, it doesn't need to because it's still a great game filled with great characters, great puzzles, creepy enemy designs, and a handful of excellent scares that make it a truly unnerving experience. I'm feeling a very strong 4 out of 5 on this game.